Now, in 1908, a commentator had speculated on his future political career. Can one who has devoured life with such feverish haste retain his zest to the end of the feast? How will 40 find him, that fatal 40, when the youth of roselight and romance has faded into the light of common day, and the horizon of life has shrunk incalculably, and when the flagging spirit no longer answers to the spur of external things, but must find its motive and energy from within, or find them not at all? Now, shortly before Churchill was 40, in August 1914, the First World War broke out, and Churchill was First Lord of the Admiralty. And some thought that in wartime he would be in his element, but from that point things began to go wrong for him, and his reputation began a long decline from which it was to be rescued only by the outbreak of the Second World War. The prime reason for the collapse of Churchill's reputation in wartime was, of course, the failure of the expedition to force the Dardanelles at Gallipoli. Gallipoli was certainly a bold conception, and it resulted from Churchill's desire to minimise casualties by adopting an indirect approach in place of the trench warfare on the Western Front. And it was for the same reason that he wanted to delay a second front, and he pressed for a Mediterranean strategy in the Second World War. Now, after the First World War, Churchill wrote a multi-volume work about it entitled The World Crisis, on which Arthur Balfour called it Winston's brilliant autobiography disguised as a history of the universe. And the book indicted Haig and the generals on the Western Front for pointless slaughter. And in December 1914, Churchill had said to the Prime Minister, there must be a better way to win the war than requiring soldiers, as he put it, to chew barbed wire in Flanders. Curiously, Gallipoli was to win for Churchill the respect and admiration of his later political opponent, Attlee, who, although badly wounded in the Gallipoli campaign, continued to regard it as the most imaginative conception of the war. Now, historians have long argued about this, but the general consensus today seems that even if it had been properly managed, which it was not, it could never have succeeded. Because even if Allied forces had established a foothold at Gallipoli, they would still have been at the mercy of hostile troops who could reach Gallipoli more easily by land than Allied troops could reach it by sea. The campaign took too little account, so most historians believe, of the brute facts of logistics. And perhaps the best that could be hoped for was that a foothold would be established. But then perhaps Allied troops would have become just as bogged down in trench warfare there as they were on the Western Front. Churchill received most of the blame for failure. It was alleged that he had bullied the First Sea Lord and the naval experts in the Admiralty against their better judgment, and had foisted upon them a plan that had little chance of success. That accusation is unfair. The plan was discussed in detail by the Admiralty and approved unanimously by the officers. And the War Council, which included ministers senior to Churchill, also approved it unanimously. They also were looking for a more effective way to prosecute the war. But once the decision was made, the admirals changed their mind and said that a naval attack on its own could not succeed, that troops would also be needed. And Churchill here was culpable in not telling his colleagues of this change of mind, but I think they must have known about it all the same. But if the expedition was, as I believe, fundamentally flawed, the greatest blame for it attaches not to Churchill, but to others more senior to him, and in my view, particularly the Prime Minister Asquith. Because Churchill, while being a leading advocate of the Dardanelles, was by no means the only advocate, nor the most senior advocate. But the other supporters of it were much more politically adroit than him. Once it was seen that the campaign had failed, they were nowhere to be seen. Churchill was not sufficiently adroit to avoid the blame, and there was a sense in which he was too direct for the intrigues of high politics. But this was a crucial episode in his career. Up to that time, it had been one of unbroken success, or so it seemed. Now he was associated with failure, and in 1915 he was demoted and then sacked from the government. And the Dardanelles was seen by many as an illustration of his unreliability. As late as 1923, he was shouted down at election meetings with cries of, "What about the Dardanelles?" And in 1925, an American commentator made a remarkably false prediction when he said, "It is doubtful if even Great Britain could survive another war and another Churchill." In 1931, a biographer wrote of him, "The ghosts of the Gallipoli dead will always rise up to damn him anew in time of national emergency. Neither official historians nor military hack writers would explain away or wipe out the memories of the Dardanelles." Churchill himself said, "I was ruined for the time being over the Dardanelles, and a supreme enterprise was cast away through my trying to carry out a major and combined operation of war from a subordinate position. Men are ill-advised to try such ventures.